The interactionist approach. Put simply, the interactionist approach, also sometimes called the biosocial approach, is an approach that acknowledges that there are biological, psychological, and social factors in the development of schizophrenia. Biological factors include genetic vulnerability and neurochemical and neurological abnormality. Psychological factors include stress, for example, resulting from life events and daily hassles, including social factors such as poor quality interactions in the family. The diathesis stress model. The diathesis stress model is one way to present an interactionist approach. And diathesis means vulnerability. In this context, stress simply means a negative experience. Diathesis stress model says that both a vulnerability to schizophrenia and a stress trigger are necessary in order to develop the disorder. One or more underlying factors make a person particularly vulnerable to developing schizophrenia, but the onset of the condition is triggered by stress. Meal's model. In the original diathesis stress model, Meal 1962, diathesis vulnerability, was entirely genetic, the result of a single schizogene. This led to the idea of a biologically based schizotypic personality, one characteristic of which is sensitivity to stress. According to Paul Meal, if a person does not have the schizogene, then no amount of stress would lead to schizophrenia. However, in carriers of the gene, chronic stress through childhood and adolescence, in particular the presence of a schizophrenic mother, see page 206, could result in the development of the disorder. Modern understanding of diathesis. One way in which our understanding of diathesis has changed is that it is now clear that many genes each appear to increase genetic vulnerability only slightly. There is no single schizogene. Ripke et al. 2014. Modern views of diathesis also include a range of factors beyond the genetic, including psychological trauma, Ingram and Luxton 2005. So trauma becomes the diathesis rather than the stressor. John Reed et al. 2001 proposed a neurodevelopmental model in which early trauma alters the developing brain. Early and severe enough trauma can seriously affect many aspects of brain development. For example, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA system can become overactive, making a person much more vulnerable to later stress. Modern understanding of stress. In the original diathesis stress model of schizophrenia, stress was seen as psychological in nature, in particular related to parenting. Although psychological stress, including that resulting from parenting, may still be considered important, a modern definition of stress, in relation to the diathesis stress model, includes anything that risks triggering schizophrenia. Houston et al. 2008. Much of the recent research into factors triggering an episode of schizophrenia has concerned cannabis use. In terms of the diathesis stress model, cannabis is a stressor because it increases the risk of schizophrenia by up to 7 times according to dose. This may be because cannabis interferes with the dopamine system. However, most people do not develop schizophrenia after smoking cannabis, presumably because they lack the requisite vulnerability factors. Treatment. According to the interactionist model, the interactionist model of schizophrenia acknowledges both biological and psychological factors in schizophrenia, and is therefore compatible with both biological and psychological treatments. In particular, the model is associated with combining antipsychotic medication and psychological therapies. Most commonly, Sin et al. 2006 point out that it is perfectly possible to believe in biological causes of schizophrenia and still practice CBT to relieve psychological symptoms. However, this requires adopting an interactionist model. It is not possible to adopt a purely biological approach and tell people diagnosed with schizophrenia that their condition is purely biological, and that there is no psychological significance to symptoms, and then to simultaneously treat them with CBT. In Britain, it is increasingly standard practice to treat people diagnosed with schizophrenia with a combination of antipsychotic drugs and CBT. In the US, there is more of a history of conflict between psychological and biological models of schizophrenia, and this may have led to slower adoption of an interactionist approach. Thus, medication without an accompanying psychological treatment is more common in the US than in the UK.